Hey, good evening everybody, and welcome to the first online seminar of 2021 for the Lincolnshire UNA. Tonight we are going to be talking about SDG Goal 1, which is poverty, and we're pleased to welcome two presenters this evening, one being Clive Wilson, the chair of the group, and also Sue Fortune, who is the CEO of the Lincolnshire Community Foundation, which, if anyone is not aware of the foundation, it was founded in 2002. To date, I think, Sue, if I've read it right, you've distributed over £16.5 million to charities, community groups and organisations,
yeah,
with the emphasis very much being on small grants to make a big difference.
About a bit.
That's always good to get first-hand experience, Mark. And the grants have helped groups tackle issues such as child poverty, loneliness and isolation, and also food poverty. As always seems to be the case with these seminars, we don't have to look too far into the news to find very recent news stories on the topic we're talking tonight. And I think we're all aware that there are a whole range of pressures that are going to come to bear on people's budgets over the next few months. So again, we find ourselves tonight talking about a very, very topical subject. The usual format, we'll talk for about 35 minutes and then move to questions and answers. And if anyone has a comment or a question they want to put, if you just pop that into the chat function on Zoom, we'll try to manage that. So without any further ado, I will hand over to Clive to open the evening. Clive.
Thank you, Bert. It's a pleasure to be here again. And we record these on the basis that we're providing an opportunity to build a library on our website of SDG topics and discussions, which we feel that can be used at other stages in other locations for helping a community understanding. We start this presentation, Bert.
Okay. Okay, Clive, you should have that presentation in front of you.
Thank you. On this, poverty is an interesting, when you say poverty to somebody, they say, well, what are you on about? Where's poverty in this country? In my own circumstance, I might know one or two people that aren't so well off. I see a lot on the news, but of course, there's lots of things around the nature of poverty we'd like to explore tonight. It's not just about, I guess, GNP per head. It's not just about income. It's about other aspects of life and lived experiences. The picture behind me, I don't know if you can see it, is a picture I painted from a photograph I took in Annecy about 4 years ago, next to a very large, prosperous, vibrant market. There was this lady sat. And it just touched me that there's someone there in the midst of everything, had nothing, and was there with a sign in French saying, please help me. I think as I was growing up, there's all sorts of people talking about poverty. You can talk about poverty in the Bible. There's people talking about poverty in humour and jokes. I remember Monty Python had sketches, or Peter Cook and Dudley Moore had sketches on who looks down on whom and how much did people eat when they were children. And of course, in my life experiences, I have grandparents that talked about their life in the 20s and the poverty of life between the First and Second World War. And right down to Christmas Eve this year, we were traveling down to stay with stepson and daughter. And in Milton Keynes, I was putting some money into a car park machine, and a young man came up and said, have you got £1 so I can get myself a cup of coffee? And I said to the person that was there by the machine, I said, is that a problem in Milton Keynes? Oh, yes, she said, we have so many bridges here over the roads, over the overpasses, over the footpaths and cycle paths. She said, we've become a bit of a mecca in the winter for homeless people living rough. And it's some of those things that personal experiences, you come and you're confronted by them, and you think, well, how come it's like this in the UK, which is perhaps the 5th largest economy in the world? Slide 1, Bert, please. If we can look at these things as we go through this, accepted definitions and current headlines, and we'll talk about, as Bert said, that it's never far from the news if we are there and we are looking at where we are, looking at poverty and contrasting it with what do we mean by development and improvement, and of course where we want to be, and there's some challenges. And obviously Sue Fortune will bring a very local dimension toward the Lincolnshire aspect of poverty. So next slide, please. A bit of background in terms of definitions. When we talk about relative poverty and absolute poverty, if you think about destitution, and that you think about we talked about migrants in the autumn, and those that's coming across the channel. We talk about those that's in famine situations, or where there's climate massive change, or there's disasters. And you think when your whole livelihood is gone, certainly there is a notion of absolute poverty. And data suggests there's about 9% of the world population in absolute poverty in 2021, as opposed to relative poverty, where we're looking at the ways in which people live alongside other people and cannot meet the minimum level of their of living standard compared to others at the same time and place. And people talk about, if you have an income of less than 60% of the median, then that is defined as relative poverty. And again, if you look at the household incomes, you're talking a huge proportion of people in relative poverty in the UK. Next slide, Bert, please. Some headlines. About 9.2% of the world, 689 million people live in extreme poverty. That's what they talk about in data that you can find on World Bank figures. Looking at rich countries, in the United States, you talk about 10.5% of the population live in poverty as of 2019 in a very, very wealthy country. Pandemic, this is a headline, pandemic consigned 230,000 more Portuguese into poverty. So something's happened. It's the pandemic. It could be a disaster. It could be other things. Suddenly you go from okay to not okay. And of course, even in Germany, you're talking about something like 16% of Germans living in poverty, 13.4 million people. So poverty isn't something that is seen in developing countries just, it's around us and around us in every aspect of our Western and our Southern lives. Thank you. Next one, please. When we talk about poverty and who is poor and who it affects most, this is some data on children's poverty. We talk about 1 in 2 children live in extreme poverty. 250 million or suffer from 2 or more deprivations in Southern and Saharan Africa, and 75 million children living in relative poverty in the world's richest countries. One of the things that we realize, and certainly my background in education and other aspects of my life, is that children living in poverty have massive impacts on their lives and life chances. And if you're not aware of it, the notion of a cycle of poverty where children brought up in poverty have limited life expectations, have impact on their education, their development, and certainly can limit their own future earnings if we're measuring earnings as a movement out of poverty. So the notion of impact on children is profound wherever in the world we see poverty. Next one, please, Bert. Recent global headlines about extreme poverty. For the first time in 20 years, as the disruption of the COVID pandemic, it forced the issues into the forefront again about how we respond. And of course, in response terms, whether it's the vaccination programs and the loss of incomes or the loss of work or the loss of the climate, loss of the economy agendas around countries which cannot trade so well, their impact on the people's lives and livelihoods. And of course, again, 100 million people are living in poverty as a result of the pandemic. Again, World Bank data. Next slide, please, Bert. In terms of the measurement of poverty, there's again a statement here about before housing costs and after housing costs. Again, it's a dimension of poverty where if you think, well, Lincolnshire, for example, I think in the 2017 was defined as the 4th poorest region in Northern Europe, with its median income of about £16,500. But of course, everyone says, well, what does that really mean? Because houses in Lincolnshire don't cost so much. So the notion of poverty in relation to income per head, as opposed to income versus costs of living per head, is something we have to think about in a different way. So the figures there, as you look, you will see that before housing costs, 2019-20, and after housing costs. So 11.7 million were in relative poverty before housing costs, at a similar level to the year before. 14.5 million in relative low income after housing costs, a similar level to the year before. But again, specifically at children, 3.2 million children, and then 4.3 million relative low income, about the same as the year before. But the notion of housing costs has actually been breached again in the last 2 or 3 years, where low interest rates have pushed up house prices. And of course, if they are bought by other people and rented out, then rent is changed. So the movement of the market in housing, again, puts people into and out of poverty by the ways that the market manipulates, or the way that the market is manipulated by the behaviors of those who have assets. Next slide, please, Bert. And we go down to the notion of locality and poverty. We're talking now about the UK picture, and this is children in poverty in UK regions. If we look at the, as a chart you can see there for yourself, the UK average is 31%, but that varies across the country with greater and lesser amounts. But of course, within the 33% you see in the Yorkshire and Humberside region, or the 27% you see within the East Midland region, they're not as high as London and North East. Nevertheless, there are pockets within that. So although we recognise there are children in poverty, and you think about the work that significant others have been doing about children in poverty, including Marcus Rashford and other significant populist people, saying it isn't right for children to be growing up in poverty. But if you take the smaller groups, so if you take the next slide, Bert, and this goes down to our own particular area. So we look at Lincolnshire parliamentary constituencies, and you see a strange array there. Scunthorpe, well over 35%, Great Grimsby, nearly 40%, Boston and Skegness, over 30%. So within the constituencies, there are pockets. And then within those pockets, within those smaller areas, there will be sections of those communities where substantially higher levels within wards or smaller areas of the towns where they are associated. So again, the locality agenda and drilling right down gives you a flavour that in Lincolnshire it's like this. But of course, around the world, there are similar settings where those things exist. I remember being in other parts of the world where you see poverty outside of a town. In Brazil, for example, I did some work where the interior people would say, I've got to get into towns to get a better living. And they arrive without the skills and the skills mix to get a living and a job. And they end up on what was the group I was involved in was a group on a dump, on a massive waste tip, where they were collecting tin cans for the aluminium in them and other items to sell as recycled items. So in those smaller areas outside larger towns, you have significant poverty. And of course, within poverty, it also drives poverty behaviours, which we will talk about a bit later on in terms of outcomes of poverty. Next slide, please. Can I hand over now to Sue Fortune, who I had the pleasure of having a wonderful conversation with fairly recently, asking her to contribute about what we know now around Lincolnshire area. Sue.
Thanks, Clive. It's interesting, the title, what do we know now? But I should say that what we know now as a foundation is what we hear from the groups we help, from the people we speak to, from the partners that we work with across the county. So we cover the whole county, including North and North East, obviously. So what we know now is driven by the communities that we're here to serve. Just a little bit, I know Bert kindly introduced the foundation, but for those who haven't heard of us, I'll just spend literally a minute or so telling you a little bit more to put things in context. So we're a grant-making trust predominantly. That's our reason for being. We give out grants, but it's not quite as simple as that, because we like to think we're embedded in the communities that we're there. And I say we serve because I do feel we're here to serve the people in this county, to make it a better place in which they all live. And wouldn't it be fantastic if we could eradicate poverty? So we have distributed substantial funds. It's not always about the money. It's about connections. It's about knowledge, introductions, support. We had a group today who submitted a bid to us, but their governance wasn't exactly as it should be, so we couldn't accept it. We didn't just say no. We said, let's try and help you. So that's really important, those networks that we've created. And the previous slide about the details for the county and the breakdown on places, it's about what we see if we look at data and we listen to intelligence. It's no surprise that places that are different levels of deprivation depending on where you go in, and I'm talking about Lincolnshire in particular. But it was interesting, I spoke to a chap who was very involved with food partnerships, Nigel Curry, if anyone's come across Nigel. And he said, it's not places that are deprived, Sue, it's the people in them that are. So, and there are pockets of deprivation across our county. It's quite a diverse county, huge, as we all know. I've been to most parts of it throughout my 20 years with the foundation. Spent a lot of time in North East Lincolnshire and Grimsby in particular. But the top of the data tells us, when we had a report, a strategy, an outside organisation prepare a document to say where we'd been investing our funds and had we been doing a good job, because it's not just for us to say, yeah, we're all great, we put money exactly where it's needed. Showed us those areas, and they were no different apart from one to those areas of need that we'd already identified. So Scunthorpe was at the top of that, along with Grimsby, but the rural deprivation as well. We've got access to healthcare, to education, to transport. So that has to be taken into the mix. We know about that. We know in Scunthorpe there are problems with employment, with skills, crime prevention, housing. The data tells us that, but what we try to do is get the feedback from people who live there. We're doing a couple of pieces of work in Scunthorpe and along the coastal strip, Skegness, Ingermells, Chapel, because we don't invest a lot of our funds in those areas. And again, I use the word invest. We're grant makers. We're not giving grants. We're investing in our communities, hoping that ultimately there'll be better places to live. And I make no apologies for using the word invest. We look at the coast as well. Skegness is a transient population. There is a high percentage of child poverty there. We're doing a piece of work in Gainsborough. It's to do with blended finance, part loan and part grant. And a really worrying stat there is that 39% of children are growing up in poverty. And most of those are in working families. So what are the causes of poverty? And we could debate that probably, Clive, and I think you might touch on that later, for some time. It's intersectional. That's the current phrase. It's lots of issues. Generally, you'll get a family, it won't just be because they're on low income, it will be because there may be mental health problems, it might be health issues, it might be low skills. So a lot of groups that we invest in, that we support, will look at not just a single issue, because you need to look at that person's, the complexities of that person's life. And the causes, it may be because there's an addiction there, it might be food poverty. So they're vast, those complexities, they're so huge. Boston, as we know, we did a deeper dive into Boston, another area that we don't see a lot of interest from in terms of grant making. And that's not an excuse that we don't invest money there. We need to do better. Similarly with Scunthorpe through COVID, one of the team members she was tasked with reaching out to minoritized communities in Scunthorpe who wouldn't necessarily see us as someone they would come to for help. Possibly because of our ethnicity, you know, the way we look on paper on our website. And we did reasonably well. I'm not saying it was, you know, we could have done better, but we're trying to increase that engagement locally. Rural South Holland, that was the surprise to us when the external agency did that look at how we invested our funding based on data. And that data was built from a position pre-COVID, during COVID, and emerging issues after COVID. And that was rural South Holland. And one of the key data flags there was access to digital media. And we saw that across the whole of the county through COVID. And I think it was the biggest way that groups had to pivot and adapt their services to go online. We're doing it now, aren't we? In normal circumstances, we may be around a table. But rural South Holland, for the everyday working person, the people who were furthest away from digital inclusion, they were suffering because of that lack of knowledge. So we looked to a local organisation, a trusted body, and we commissioned them to deliver support to those furthest away from the digital market. The gap between COVID, the gap between those who have and those who have not is widened through COVID, and it continues to widen. But I'll come back to that and what we're doing, because I can easily switch over the two to what we know now and to what we're doing. I think, I'm just looking at the time, I think probably that I can talk forever about the foundation and the work we do, but is that sufficient, Clive, for your purposes now?
That's great. It's the locality, and we now know more than we did before. That's important. It gives food for thought about how we address those things, and particularly how you pick up the nature of poverty being beyond just income per head. It's the wider aspect of the future of the person that you're talking about investing in, and how you do that appropriately. Thank you so much. We'll pick you up later on.
Yes.
Okay,
all right.
Thank you. Next slide, Bert. I've got 1.9 causes of poverty. If you look at the reasons why people are in poverty, there's both local, national, and international on this one here. These are the kind of the top 8. There are more, but of course, if you think about if it's about a measure of income per head as defining poverty, then if you haven't got a good job, you got low income. If there's no more jobs coming, then it's hard to get jobs. If it's a lack of a good education, you think about the modern world, and I refer to the issues in Brazil, where I was doing some work in Recife. If you haven't got skills for the modern workplace, then you can't get into them. So your education is about that, but not about just a good education in terms of the skills for work, but it's also the skills for living, and be able to access information and work with others, and have self-esteem within the work and life that you live. Obviously, internationally, warfare and conflict, if you look at the work and issues around Yemen at the moment, and the horrendous issues faced by the people there, you see warfare and conflict massively engaged. Weather and climate change, well, we're not far from the news of looking at Tonga and the issues that they're going to face immediately around the change to their circumstances from the volcano in the ocean. Social injustice, and you think about, well, why does that cause it? Well, whilst you have societies that turn their back on the poor or turn their back on each other, you have significant communities around the world where people segregate themselves or give preferential treatment to those who fit their package than others. If you go to other parts of the world, in developing countries that I've been to, lack of food and water and basic infrastructure enables people to survive but not thrive. So if you want to thrive and grow, you have to have basic basic provisions, I guess, you're going to talk about it. The time I spent in the Transkei and Eastern Cape, where they had water delivered to the village that came by donkeys, and they had a well and a lake at the hill. And these donkeys were so regular, they'd fill the donkeys up with the water carrying barrels, and they would kick the backsides of the donkeys, and they would go down and stop at their regular stopping points through the village where people would take water out of the carrying. But they had people protecting the water at the top of the hill, because they knew that if it was polluted or things got into it that caused it to change, then they would be poorly and ill as a result of that. So lack of food, lack of infrastructure, and again, lack of government support. And again, we look around the world at the nature of governments and governance, and the notion of how governments are influenced by the people that are in their communities is a key thing. So the notion of democratic governance, or open governance or transparent governance is very important in terms of how poverty can be caused, but also how poverty can be addressed. Next slide, please, Bert. Okay, 110. We are decision makers. In December 7th, 2020, this is the people that says what's happened. Inequality has, in 2020, saw the steepest increase in billionaires' wealth on record. And this is poverty and wealth. If there is increased income to billionaires, is it because there is less for others, or is it just the gap that gets wider? But again, 100 million sink into extreme poverty. Richest 10% of the population now takes 52% of global income, and the poorest half, just 8%. So in terms of the cycle of activity and the business cycle, then the ways in which incomes are distributed are not necessarily addressing the poorest. Again, billionaires' wealth, 1% to 3% of world wealth. And of course, the increased change both locally and nationally and internationally through COVID. Sharpest increase in billionaires' share of wealth on record. And in terms of the growth in the last period of time, since 1995, there's been a movement towards those who have from those who haven't. So the notion of wealth, and of course, if wealth is honed in productive activity, shares, stocks, land, assets, that generates its own income thereafter. So the notion of wealth as being an asset that can produce an income exacerbates the difference between those who have and have not. Next slide, please, Bert. Okay, let's move on to a thing beyond money. If we look at some work done around Oxford and an initiative taken up, we talk about the dimension of poverty around Human Development Initiative. It was the Oxford Human Development Initiative that was put together to talk about 10 indicators and 3 dimensions. So if we look at a person being measured against this, have they got enough food, nutrition? Are their children dying young because of health reasons? Are there people that are attending school and achieving in school? Has been education. And of course, then the living standards in terms of can they access things to cook food? Is there sanitation and drinking water? Do you have electricity, housing, or do you have assets that means you can tide yourself over in times of challenge? So the dimensions of poverty were brought out as saying, well, look, let's look beyond just the nature of income-based activity with the cash you have that you receive from benefits or work or whatever. But of course, all of these tie into a community agenda. So health agendas, as we've discovered with COVID, are about behaviors of people in terms of transmitting diseases. And education is a community agenda. You don't educate a child on its own. The old phrase that it takes a village to bring up a child is very relevant, because you learn from those in your villages, wherever those are around the world, the communities in which you grow up. And in terms of the access to housing, it's interesting in terms of a poverty agenda. My son's in New Zealand at the moment and is trying to buy a house. COVID has caused huge amounts of capital to flow back into New Zealand in certain areas from around the world. House prices have gone ballistic in the last 18 months. So those who have bought them are now charging higher rents for them. So, and again, the same thing I think is happening across the UK. In other parts of the world, if you think about movements of people into city areas, you only look at the slums outside Nairobi, Kibera, and you look at the places in India, is it Vareni in near Kolkata, where huge numbers have actually accumulated because they can't access better living standards elsewhere. So living standards in terms of, as it describes there, drinking water. The place in Africa I attended said, well, okay, if we bring water in, it's not just water in, because you increase water would mean that you need increased drainage. So if you've got toilets that flush, or you have more water used than you had before, where does it drain to? And so addressing sanitation and addressing at the same time as drinking water is the same. And it's the same in developed countries. And you think about even the areas of the floodplain around Boston in recent times, where the climate change caused a change to happen, and suddenly land became flooded. And of course, drainage issues happened, and you have a challenge given to a community down there. So the notion of poverty, in terms of its flow, as opposed to its fixed point, can take in all those dimensions and measured in those indicators. Next slide, Bert, please. Of this target issues, we have 1.3 billion worldwide in poverty, 50% children, 60% in middle income countries, and then they kick in 84% in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, 84% in rural areas. And again, picking up Sue's point and the knowledge that we have of this area here that we live in, you think about access to the internet. And we did a session last year on the digital divide. And as our economies move on and our dialogues move on and our technology moves on, if you do not have those things, then in your rural areas, you are less well off than you could possibly be, because access to those things gives you an entree into communications for all manner of reasons, not just a way of earning a living. Next slide, please, Bert. Some years ago in the world I did in teaching, I would ask a question of students saying, well, who would like to be richer than their parents? And that interesting question becomes, well, how do you get to be richer than your parents? And I said my conclusion was, well, you either earn it, you steal it, you win the lottery, and then they would say, well, suppose I inherited it. Well, I said, well, if you inherit it from your parents, then you're going to be richer than your parents, are you? You're going to be the same. So it's earning, stealing, or you're lucky on the lottery. But of course, that's just about measuring, again, income. But in terms of a broader aspect about this, when I spoke to Sue before this session, we talked about the poverty of hope, or the poverty that comes from not having hope, and the notion of a sense of purpose, that you have a reason for getting up and doing things. There's a poverty in terms of my life and well-being. In terms of my social connections and isolationism, and you think about poverty of the aged, and you think about rural areas in Lincolnshire or city areas where old people can't feel comfortable to go out and socially connect. We talk about the poverty around mental well-being. And there's a whole agenda in our community being talked about now, much more so than in the past, And certainly the impact of COVID and mental well-being has been documented around all age groups. Physical health, we know about in terms of well-being, and of course financial management, the ability to manage money and to work with financial elements of life. But of course, my well-being is about also my dynamic well-being, my future and hope. I suppose the question I've got to ask in this, in terms of our educational processes, where we have, certainly in this country, students in learning for 15 years or so now, then where is it that these things are addressed? Their sense of purpose, their social connections, their mental, their physical, and their financial management. And so if you're taking charge of your life to lift yourself with assistance and support into a better place, which of these do you describe as being your needs and what you want to have? Next slide, please, Bert. And of course, do we all want to be as rich as the richest person in the world? And this begs the question about, is that possible? Is it something we want? Is it something we should address? And this is a picture from some new thinking around Kate Raworth, who started this stuff a while ago, called what's called donut economics. And it talks about those things in the center, which are the unacceptables. If you haven't got those, it's not acceptable. So resilience, education, income, water, food, all the Maslow's hierarchy of needs are in there. And those are the essential things that we want to have for everybody. And if we haven't got those are the social foundation of our living, well, there is something wrong. And of course, poverty can be described in those elements within the center. And on the outside, on the blue outside, it talks about all those which are the environmental ceilings, or the outside circle of ceilings that says, if we wish to have a better life, to what extent does that better life impact on this ceiling of activity? So climate change is a massive one at the moment. We all talk about climate change. We talk about land use. We've talked about these in other talks we've done. So if we're trying to address poverty, and in addressing poverty, we cause ourselves to push out on that ceiling, what are we really doing? Are we making our possibilities for our next generations poorer? The fact that you have, and we forecast, 2.5 or possibly up to 4%, 4 degrees change in the climate, does that mean that our children's children will be living poorer than our children today? So there's a whole debate around what it is that we move from and to in addressing poverty. And if we're lifting up the life expectations for people to live as the richest, then there's a challenge for us all in terms of the impact on our, the ceiling activities that's listed down there. Interesting thing around about this one here is how you communicate this agenda to all those to enable us to live in this safe and just space. Next one, Bert, please. We're getting onto this idea of development, and this is a picture of a place this is actually Lesotho, and they're walking down a road, and these will be walking down one of the roads that's there, and they're actually going to a funeral, to be honest, and it's not that the picture I was wanted to show. But as I walked to work one day in the Transkei with a girl called Papama who I was staying with, I said, would you have a car and drive it to work for a mile? Oh yes, I would, she said, but the roads are bumpy. Would you want roads that are flat and I've got tarmac on? She said, oh yes, that'd be great. And I said, would you like wide roads with white lines and footpaths so the children that walk down here are safe? That's just what we want, she said. And would you drive flat on these fast roads? Would you go fast so you can get to work in about a minute? Oh yes, exactly. I said, but the school has got cars that are so fast and they fly past the school gates, you'd be dangerous for the children. And she said, we need to have then speed bumps like they got in Umtata. And it's an interesting thing there that is this the nature of progress? Because that's what they've seen. That's what they've seen, the more affluent people in their communities. We drive our agenda around a lifestyle that in the end becomes something that is something that is peculiar. We want to have speed bumps in the road to keep the kids safe from people who are driving too fast. It's an interesting kind of juxtaposition on the notion of development. Next one, Bert, please. Okay, United Nations Sustainable Goal 1, aim poverty everywhere in all forms. Okay, let's find ways of doing that. By 2030, eradicate extreme poverty for all people to lift it out of poverty about less than $1.25 a day. From 2015, it's more, about $2 a day at the moment. By 2030, reduce at least by half the proportion of men, women, and children of all ages living in poverty in all dimensions according to national definitions. Okay, where we want to be. Next one, please. Okay, can decent work? Well, this is about business, this first one. 5, what are the shiniest objects for business? If you look at supply chains of all aspects, all goods and services, is there justice in the income earned by people in those supply chains? Is there issues around modern slavery in those supply chains? We don't know all the supply chain routes, but of course there are significant things that businesses can do by examining the supply chains in their work settings. Next one, Bert. Oxfam talk about a poverty footprint tool, an assessment tool to enable companies and civil partners to understand corporate impacts of the multidimensional poverty. And they're saying, well, okay, let's take this multidimensional approach to poverty, like the Human Development Index, and say, well, where in your work setting are you addressing these things? With your employees, with their families, with the communities in which you work and serve, with the supply chains you work with the companies in that supply chain. Next one, Bert. For government, this is government stuff. United Kingdom Social Mobility Commission 2021. They talk about as a levelling up agenda. And of course, we've seen all sorts of things on the news around that, and we're uncertain about many things that are happening. Geography and local power, poverty and living standards, early years, and of course about working with children to enable them to get a better start in life. Next one, Bert. These are still part of the same thing. A bigger focus on education, on long-term deprivation, funding targets, and looking at the support for people in terms of catching up, apprenticeships and adult skills. And those are all things that are now being talked about by government, yet to be delivered. Next one, Bert. Digital access, we've talked about that, but of course that's a longer term thing, and it's going to be an ongoing thing, and work and career progression. These are the things that the government has talked about within the Social Mobility Commission. Next one, Bert. So, where we are going.
Where we're going.
What are we doing?
Interesting. I was thinking about the lottery. Actually, I was thinking I've bought some Euro Millions tickets. That could be my lucky night. And when you talked about isolation, that struck a huge chord for us. We're doing a piece of engagement along the coast in Mablethorpe, Trusthorpe, and Sutton-on-Sea. Very low level engagement. So we managed to get questionnaires in the vaccination centres. And the data tells us that the problems there are to do with employment, seasonal employment, coastal area, education. What the people told us was they wanted a dentist because the nearest dentist was over 20 miles away. But the next highest on people's agenda was loneliness. People felt lonely. But there's a lot of activities, so community activity there, but no one knows about it. So that was flagged up to us. We need to support the community so that they know what's out there. So what are we doing? So as a foundation, the Community Foundation, our 3-year strategy, which is we're working on it at the moment actually, is to build our endowment. So to build funding that hopefully will last in perpetuity, but make a difference at ground zero, really, at community level, to address some of those, what can be referred to as wicked issues. So it may be domestic abuse, homelessness, addiction, and to make a long-term systemic change to those issues. So it won't happen overnight. It's a long journey that we're on. The foundation in Lincolnshire hasn't built our model on that. but other foundations, Northamptonshire, our nearest neighbours, 2 ridings up in East Yorkshire, they certainly have a good track record. So we're learning from them. But what's become clear, I think, to everyone, not just in the voluntary and community sector, which is the sector we predominantly work in, is that you need to collaborate and co-create and co-design. I was over at a conference some years ago in Liverpool, and there were all these fantastic new buildings, and my opposite number there, I said to Greg, wow, look at that. He said, yes, Sue, it's fine having buildings, but you need the people who are committed to drive the activities that take place in the buildings. If you don't have that, we're now, I think there's a lot of EU funding came in, we're now sitting with lots of buildings, but no one to actually operate them for communities. So that's important. So it's building connections. I referred to connections earlier, making sure that local authorities, the private, the public sector, the voluntary sector are working together. And I talk from the voluntary sector perspective, and Mark, you might, and others might, I hope, agree with this. They need to recognise the value of what happens from people on their patch, and accept and sort of encourage and treasure that feedback and that wealth of knowledge, because the heart, if it doesn't work for the communities, it won't work for the people who live there. So collaboration, I'll put some notice. We're now, the County Council, Lincolnshire County Council, is now building a model to engage with the voluntary sector that will have some meaning and gravitas and be able to start making a change. It won't happen overnight. You know, systemic change doesn't happen in 6 months and sometimes 6 years. It could take up to 20 years. I mentioned Gainsborough, we're working there. There's an initiative, but also some of the larger funders are recognising the challenges that communities have moving forward, and they're coming together. And there's a big piece of work happening in Lincoln at the moment with some of the national funders, Esme Fairbairn, Paul Hamlin Foundation, Lloyd's TSB Foundation. So that's good news, but they're coming to the communities and they're asking the communities to work together to inform them about how they can invest in those areas. And these are pilot projects. So Lincolnshire's got one of those, and with a view to doing some more work moving forward, but not over 2 years, over 10, perhaps 20 years. And we hope to be part of that journey along with them. What we're doing at the foundation, our funds, we want to target those funds that we do have access to into those areas of greatest need, or we talk about place-based. So we'll build place-based funds. Say Lincoln was one, we'd build a fund that would be there in perpetuity and help address some issues. It may be a community of interest, it might be people with disabilities, the LGBTQ communities, whatever matters to people. Then hopefully if there's a cause, then we'll be there to help them raise funding and address some of those needs. What else have I got here? Yeah, I mean, something, I think you need to educate people, don't you? Some people. In my early days in this role, I do recall, and it was quite sad to hear someone say, what poverty? There's no poverty in Lincolnshire. Because some people, and you have to challenge, are blinded to that poverty. They don't see it. They see green fields, you know, they go up to the walls and they see. So I think there needs some education. We talk from our point of view at the foundation, we've got a bit of a gap on raising awareness about who we are. Should we be a household name? Ideally, yes. Are we? No, we're not really. But I think people need to be aware of the different ways they can help, they can engage. And there are moves, COVID's helped that, people came out and help people along their street. So there's lots that we can all do, even from a community level, a personal level, to address poverty by going knocking on your neighbour's door and seeing if they're all right. That's one way that you can help alleviate that poverty of isolation. So yeah, sorry, conscious of time. I think you're on mute, Clive.
Next one, Bert. Okay. So there we are. There's the challenge. That's the challenge of our seminar. What are the actions that individuals across the world can take to make a positive difference to achieve UN SDG 1 of eradicate poverty everywhere? We'll open this up to other people now to have a say, a question, and take it from there. Is that okay, Bert? Thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, Clive. has anybody online got a particular question they'd like to put to either Sue or Clive at this minute in time? If you just give me an indication. Mark, and then Mark.
Sorry. Yeah, not a question so much, but I think what we are seeing, especially right now, is this energy or fuel poverty, which is becoming a real issue. So, you know, some of the monies that some of these people have been accessing to support their families is reducing, yet we've got the other end of what we call standard living, just keeping warm and cooking, going the absolute opposite. And I find this most distasteful because, you know, without even, things to eat that's nutritious and healthy, we're going to develop communities that are going to need to do things that are not socially acceptable to keep just living. And I'm concerned about that. And as you probably, well, I know Clive knows, Sue, we've been chatting away as we've been listening and talking, but I think we need to try to develop more community-led approaches to sustainable food growing and knowledge sharing, so that those people can get involved in small, tiny micro projects that can support at least the bare necessities. And I believe food is one of them. Energy clearly is another. We absolutely all take it for granted when we switch the lights on, the telly on, we switch the cooker on and we put the soup on, or that these things are just acceptable for 99% of us, but that small percentage that is going to have some real difficulties. And I know there's other poverty issues, don't get me wrong, plenty of them, but these ones are ones that I'm hoping our project might just be able to promote and support in the future.
Lovely. Thanks, Mark. Sue, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, just to mention, Mark, I don't know if anyone on the call is aware of vertical farming.
Yeah, we're going to be doing it, and
right.
up on it. Yes.
Because there's a new organisation in the county who've set up called Digital Bunker. Who wanted
Kenny.
Oh, yeah.
We're working with him. Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, so see these connections. Yeah, we're aware of what they're doing. Rob and Kenny. Yeah. Okay, that's good. Thank you. And we run a few poverty scheme for the coast. I mentioned earlier, Mablethorpe, helping individuals. And honestly, it's heartbreaking. We've got a member of the team takes the calls, and it's, yeah, people are choosing whether they heat their homes or they eat. It's that simple. And
we're hoping soon, Sue, when we get a few things sorted out on our site, to access the energy redress scheme, where we might just be able to help people understand and maybe deal with some of these these energy issues that they're facing. So fingers crossed we might get in a position ourselves, a bit like your own organisation, where we just might be able to help them a little bit, look at the various forms of energy, see if we can help them to find different sources and a bit of support. So fingers crossed.
Lovely. Thank you, Mark. I think we've probably just got time. Biff, did you want to come in with a question?
Yeah, not so much a question, just a little observation. One of the slides showed a diagram from Kate Rayworth. It's Rayworth, not Raworth. I can really recommend her book, Donut Economics, if you want to get into the sort of real background philosophy of how the economic system works. And her colleague Jason Hickel, that's his, not his latest book, but his previous one, his more recent book called Less is More, addresses a lot of the things that we've discussed this evening. So I'll just flag those two points up if you want to get into the background of why there are poor people, maybe what we can do about it.
That's lovely. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Can I just say that one of the challenges, I think we've met once before, Biff, but the biggest challenge I find is that again, an educational background, we have students involved in education for compulsory education, yet the things we've just mentioned there, they do not form part of the dialogue. And of course, if you don't have the conversations, and part of our agenda here around these seminars is to see if we can get things put into schools, colleges, communities, local governments, parish councils. If those dialogues are not happening, there's a barrier there around the whole aspect about both poverty, but the crucial one about development and sustainable development in the way we move out of poverty agenda. And it's crucial that the things you've mentioned there are put into those dialogues, because if we don't, we just stir up the next agenda for poverty.
Lovely. Clive, I think that's pretty close to our allotted time now. If nobody else has any questions or observations they want to make, then perhaps we can start to wind up for the evening. I suppose on behalf of the group, I'd just like to thank Sue and Clive for their input this evening. We don't just arrive at these sessions without a lot of work going in beforehand. As always, it's topical. As always, it's thought-provoking. And thank you very, very much to the two of you for your time and your efforts tonight, and for people for participating. Clive, any final words for yourself tonight?
Just a great thanks to Sue for assistance with this, because the purpose of our agenda here is, okay, think global, but act local. Make the differences you can in the dialogues you have with the people you know and love. Thank you.